So let's talk about something I bet has crossed your mind. How do you even begin to engage with a really big, complex idea when you only understand a tiny piece of it? Well, today we're going to dive into a pretty powerful framework for overcoming that exact ambiguity, helping us find clarity, even when we feel like we're totally lost in a sea of conflicting information. You know the feeling, right? You're scrolling online, you come across some big idea or a complicated term, and it seems like everyone's using it, but all in slightly different ways. It's so easy to feel lost and start wondering, wait, did I misunderstand something? Or has this whole idea been twisted somewhere along the line? Well, if you felt that way, you are definitely not alone. The challenge of just trying to navigate a world that's packed with misunderstood and, sometimes intentionally confusing ideas is exactly what we're going to break down in this explainer. And we're going to use a really insightful personal framework as our guide. All right, let's get right into it. The analysis we're digging into today starts with a question that, let's be honest, we've all probably asked ourselves. How can I talk about, or maybe even defend, one part of a complex system of thought if I don't really get the whole thing? It's such a great starting point because it's just so relatable. So to tackle this, the author uses this really compelling personal analogy, comparing how they approach two very different ways of knowing things. And this comparison, it's pretty much the key to unlocking this entire framework. Okay, so this is where the author's own experience comes into play, and it's fascinating. On one hand, you've got their faith, Islam, which they give total acceptance to. And why? Because they feel like they have a solid grasp of its root principles. So even if they don't know every single detail, every little branch, understanding that core root is enough for them to offer their full support. But then, on the other hand, when you look at the super complex philosophy of thinkers like Ibn Arabi and Sadra, we're talking these huge, influential figures in Islamic thought with really intricate ideas, the author is honest and says, you know what, I don't fully grasp the root here. So their approach is totally different. They only engage with it partially, focusing on specific branches, certain ideas that they can understand and talk about. But look, this isn't just about faith versus philosophy, right? The author is using this personal rule to build a much bigger principle that really applies to all of us. So what's the crucial takeaway here? And here it is, the big idea. Partial understanding is not a failure. It's actually a valid and often totally necessary way to engage with complicated stuff. You don't have to be the world's leading expert on a topic to be able to grasp a part of it, to discuss it, or even to help clarify it for someone else. I mean, how empowering is that? But you might be thinking, okay, how does this actually work in practice? It sounds good in theory, but is it a solid approach? Well, the author argues that it absolutely is, and they give two key reasons why this isn't just wishful thinking. It's actually a reflection of how ideas work out in the real world. So what are the two pillars holding this whole thing up? It's simple, really. First, complex ideas have a structure we can follow. And second, ideas often spread because they latch onto things we, as a society, already kind of know or believe. Think about it like this. A thinker's work isn't just some random jumble of thoughts thrown onto a page. It's built with purpose, with logic, and it creates what you could call a trail of thought. You can follow that trail for a little while, understand a specific point or a concept, without needing to have the entire map of their intellectual universe laid out in front of you. Okay, so what about that second point? Why does one specific idea from a super dense philosophical book suddenly go viral on social media? Well, it's usually because that one little piece, that single branch, connects in a really powerful way with a common belief or a shared feeling that's already out there. It just resonates, even if 99% of the people sharing it have never even heard of the original source. But, and this is a big but, here's where we have to be really careful. This exact process, ideas spreading virally based on just a partial understanding, it's powerful, for sure, but it's also really dangerous. It opens the door for some huge problems. See, when that little viral piece of an idea gets detached from its original context, or if it's explained poorly, it can create massive confusion. Widespread misunderstanding can take root, and sometimes something that's completely false can end up being accepted as truth, just because it feels right or connects to that common understanding we're just talking about. So what do? Do we just throw our hands up and let the confusion win? No way. The author argues that this is precisely where we, all of us, have a really important role to play. This is really a call to action. Recognizing this problem of misunderstanding isn't just some academic exercise. It's an invitation for us to become part of the solution. We actually have a collective responsibility to step in and help out. So, what does this mission to clarify actually look like? Well, it's about gently helping to correct things when we suspect they're being misunderstood. It's about countering people who are deliberately twisting ideas for their own gain. It's about trying to make sure complex terms are used the way they were intended. And, most importantly, it's about participating in the conversation, even if our own understanding is only partial and even if our views can be debated. Just making the effort to bring a little more clarity is what truly matters. And that brings us to a final question for you. Now that you're armed with this framework, this idea that you don't need to know everything to clarify something, what's one term, one concept, or one idea that you've seen misused or misunderstood out there that you could help bring a little more clarity to? Thanks for joining us for this explainer. Hey, welcome back. So, last time we dove into how tricky words and ambiguous language can create all sorts of confusion in global communication. Today, we're going to tackle a different kind of gap. This isn't about words, it's about worlds. We're looking at that ambiguity that pops up when timeless ancient truths bump up against our super fast paced modern lives. All right, so let's just get right to the heart of it with this question. How can something that's supposed to be timeless actually feel fresh and relevant right now? I mean, it's a real challenge, right? Trying to connect that deep wisdom with what we're actually dealing with day to day. This connects back to what we were saying before. You don't always have to understand every single detail of some super complex work to get the main point. Think about it like this. You can recognize the fundamental truth of a tree's roots without needing to know the purpose of every single branch. And that's so important because, man, sometimes it feels like there's this massive chasm separating those ancient roots of wisdom from the world we're living in today. And that leads us right here to the core of the problem. It's this feeling, this gap between foundational, timeless truths on one side and the hard, solid facts of modern life on the other. It can seriously feel like you're standing on one edge of a canyon, looking at this profound truth way over on the other side, and there's just no obvious bridge to get there. Now, what's really fascinating is how that feeling of disconnect can be, well, really unsettling. It can mess with your head, shake your confidence, and just create a lot of confusion. The source material actually has a great word for this, Goya. It's this sense of being fundamentally shaken, almost destabilized. But here's the key takeaway. The problem isn't with the truth itself, not at all. It's a challenge of context. So, okay, if we're going to build a bridge across that chasm, what's the first thing we need? We need a solid anchor point, right? We need a rock-solid foundation on the side of timeless truth that we can start building from. And to get that foundation, our source brings up something called Quranic epistemology. Now, I know that sounds really academic and complicated, but think of it as just a framework for understanding. The real ultimate anchors are the Quran and the Sunnah. Amazing scholars like Al-Ghazali, they're not the anchors themselves. They're more like expert guides, the ones who've mapped the terrain and can show us the clearest path to connect to those anchors. They make it all simpler. But here's the twist. Here's why that gap feels wider and more intimidating than maybe ever before. It's because the demands of our modern world, what we even consider to be a good answer, have changed a lot. Let's just walk through how this pressure has ramped up. Back in the day, if an explanation was logical, if it was rational, that was often good enough. But today, we demand more. We ask, okay, that makes sense on paper, but is it realistic? How does this actually work in the real world? And the pressure just keeps building from there. What used to be accepted as realistic is now put to the test for objectivity. We want proof, verifiable evidence that isn't just based on someone's personal experience or their own logic. And it doesn't stop there. From objective, the goalposts move again. Now, we want to know the fundamental principles behind the whole thing. It's not enough to know what something is. We have to understand the deep underlying why. And this just brings it all home. This is the final layer. What was once accepted simply on the authority of Scripture now has to also be intellectually and, yes, scientifically coherent. That is a heavy, heavy burden. And it's exactly what can leave people feeling that gastaya, that shaken state, if those connections aren't made crystal clear. So what do we do? How do we meet all these modern demands without watering down the timeless truth? Well, the answer is in synergy. It's a team effort, really. A partnership between the incredible, established wisdom of the scholars and the work of us, the modern learners. We're the ones who have to be the bridge builders. And this slide really breaks down what our role in that synergy looks like. It's a four-step process. First, you got to do the homework. Study the great scholars, really understand that foundation. Second, get a handle on the consensus they've built over centuries. Third, and this is where we come in, we help fill that gap. We provide the modern context, the examples from our world. And finally, by doing all that, we're not changing the truth, we're reaffirming it. We're making it come alive for a whole new generation. Okay, and this right here is probably the most important point of this whole explainer. Let me be super clear. This is not about changing the truth. It's not about modifying it to make it more palatable for our modern tastes. No way. The goal is to take the path to that unchanging truth and just make it wider, make it clearer, make it more accessible for people who are trying to find their way in this crazy, complex world. All right, let's get out of the clouds and make this really tangible. What does this bridge building actually look like in practice? Well, it all comes down to telling the difference between the core principle and the practical application. Just look at this slide. It's a perfect example. The core principle, the foundation, the Sharia, is the requirement of 5 daily prayers. That is unchangeable. It's a bedrock truth. But the adapted practice, the thick, that's the bridge. That's what answers modern questions like, hey, how do I pray on an airplane? Or what about in space? The application can adapt to new contexts, but that foundation stays absolutely firm. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? Truth is true forever. When we do the work to expand our understanding, to build these bridges of context, we aren't changing the destination one bit. We're just widening the path so more people can make the journey. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. As you look around at our world today, with all of its brand new questions and its unique challenges, what timeless ideas do you think are most in need of a new bridge? Have you ever read some ancient wisdom and just hit a wall? You try to connect it to our modern world with its demand for hard proof and scientific data, and it just doesn't seem to line up. It's a real tension, right? So today, we're going to dive into exactly that. How can these foundational, timeless truths stay constant while our understanding of them actually grows and evolves? Okay, let's get into it. So here's the game plan. First, we'll look at why old answers are facing brand new questions. Then we'll touch on the idea of a foundation of truth. After that, we're going to unpack a really key concept called occasionalism. We'll use a cool analogy, the game and the code, to make it all make sense. And finally, we'll see how all this means our understanding can expand without ever changing the core. All right, so let's just put the main question right out there, the one that's at the heart of this whole explainer. Why does it feel like there's this growing gap, this disconnect between these ancient ways of knowing and how we think and question things today? It's a challenge, for sure, especially when you're trying to make sense of both faith and reason in your own life. And that brings us perfectly to our first section, yesterday's answers, today's questions. We're about to explore why ideas that, for centuries, were seen as totally complete answers now face this whole new level of scrutiny in our world. Think of it like this. Way back when, for early scholars, an answer often contained its own why. It was just self-evident. But now, in our super detailed data-driven world, those same answers can feel a little, ambiguous. We're always looking for that clear, bright line connecting a timeless principle to the hard facts we see in front of us. And this slide just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? You can see how the whole burden of proof has shifted over time. It started with an idea just needing to be rational. Then the bar was raised. It had to be realistic. Then it had to be objective. And today, the ultimate test is often whether something is scientifically and empirically provable. You can see how this creates a huge challenge for older wisdom if you don't have the right framework. But what if some truths were never meant to be proven in a lab in the first place? And that leads us right into our next section, a foundation of truth. Here, we're going to explore the idea of absolute, unchanging principles that exist on a totally different level from the facts we can see and measure. We're talking about the kind of bedrock principles that thinkers like Al-Ghazali built their entire worldview on. Statements like, God is eternal, or creation is not. These aren't scientific hypotheses to be tested, they're foundational truths. And this brings us to a really fascinating and totally crucial idea for this discussion, the principle of occasionalism. So what in the world is occasionalism? Let's dive in and define it because, honestly, it offers a radically different way of looking at cause and effect, the very thing we take for granted every single day. Okay, so at its core, occasionalism says this: a match doesn't actually cause a fire. Whoa, right? Instead, it suggests that the match striking and the fire starting are two separate events, or occasions. And get this, both of them are caused directly at the exact same moment by a single ultimate source. In this framework, that's God. It's a huge shift in how you see the world. And here's the two views, side by side. On the left, you've got the scientific view we all know. Cause A leads to effect B. Simple, direct, observable. It's a relative truth that works and it's super useful. But on the right, you have the occasionalist view. Now, it doesn't deny that A and B happen together. It just adds another layer. It says they're correlated events, and a single absolute source is the real cause behind both. Now, I know this can be a bit of a mind bender of a concept, so let's use a modern analogy to make it all click. We're going to call it the game and the code. Just go with me here for a second. Imagine that the physical world we see and touch and interact with operates like a super advanced, incredibly realistic video game. Okay, so in this game, science is basically the player's manual. It's the study of the game's rules. If you press this button, your character jumps. If you mix these two potions, you get a new effect. These cause and effect relationships are the predictable, consistent rules inside the game's reality. But here's the thing. The game itself, all of its rules, its physics, every single pixel, it all depends on something deeper, right? It depends on the computer it's running on, and more importantly, the underlying source code. That code is the absolute reality that makes the entire game possible. And this is the key. The programmer, the absolute cause, isn't bound by the rules of the game. They wrote the rules. They can patch the game, change the law of gravity, or make an item suddenly appear out of thin air because they have direct access to the source code. This is how occasionalism and science can exist together. Science studies the rules of the game. Occasionalism points to the program. So, how does this help us in the real world? What's the practical takeaway? Well, that brings us to our final section, expanding, not changing. We're going to see how this two-layer model lets our understanding adapt to new situations without ever touching the core principles. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? Truth is true forever. The understanding of it expands without contradicting the previous understanding. The idea here is that the core truth, the source code, if you will, it never changes. But our ability to understand it and apply it in new situations, well, that can and absolutely should grow over time. This table gives us a perfect real-world example. Let's look at prayer. The foundation, the what, is the absolute requirement of 5 daily prayers. That's the source code. It's non-negotiable. But the adaptation, the how, can evolve. Figuring out how to pray on a moving airplane, or even in outer space in zero gravity, that's an expansion of our understanding to fit a new context. See? We're not changing the what, we're just adapting the how. And in Islamic thought, this has a name. It's the difference between Sharia and fiqh. You can think of Sharia as the unchanging divine law. That's the source code. Fiqh is the human jurisprudence, the deep scholarly effort to understand and apply that code to brand new situations. Fiqh can adapt and evolve, but that foundation, it stays absolute. So we'll end with this to chew on. This model of 2 layers, the observable game and the unseen code, it really gives us a way to hold on to foundational truths while still being fully engaged with our modern scientific world. And it leaves us with a question to ask ourselves. What other rules in our own lives might be guided by a deeper code that we don't always see? It's a thought that really bridges the gap between the ancient and the modern, the seen and the unseen.
Hey everyone, what if the goal of an argument wasn't to win, but to understand? It sounds simple, right? But today, we're going to dive into a little shift in thinking that could totally change how you see, well, pretty much every disagreement or complex idea you come across.
You know, we live in a world that gives us answers at the speed of light. But does all that speed come with a hidden cost? Are we accidentally training ourselves to just react instantly, instead of taking a moment to really reflect? This is the big question we're tackling today.
I mean, think about it. Our world is literally built for speed, from getting a diagnosis in minutes to communicating across the globe in seconds. And the upside is incredible efficiency, for sure, but the hidden risk here is that we're training our minds to be hurried, which can really lead to being careless, especially when we're up against ideas that are complex or challenge what we believe. You can see this tension playing out in some of the biggest debates, like the classic clash between science and faith. On one side, you have the scientific method, which is all about cause and effect. But on the other, you have these deep philosophical ideas, like one from Al-Ghazali called occasionalism, which suggests a higher power is the direct cause of every single event. Now, faced with two ideas that seem to be in total conflict, our speedy modern mindset just pushes us to pick a side and immediately start poking holes in the other.
But what if there's a better way to look at these conflicts? This brings us to a really cool new framework, understanding the difference between two kinds of gaps in our understanding.
So on one side, we've got what's called the rebuttal gap. That's when you see a disconnect and you immediately view it as a flaw, something to attack. But on the other side, there's the truth gap, and that's seeing that exact same disconnect as a space to be explored. See the difference? One is all about winning the argument, the other is about finding a much deeper understanding.
The rebuttal gap is kind of our default setting in a debate. You know that, aha, I found a hole in your logic, so you must be wrong feeling? That's it. It's a mindset that's laser-focused on finding an error, any error, just to justify a quick dismissal. It's fast, it's decisive, but man, it often misses the bigger picture entirely.
Now, the alternative is the truth gap. This mindset reframes that very same hole in logic. It's not a flaw, it's an invitation. It encourages us to step back and ask, wait a minute, what if this isn't a contradiction at all, but an undiscovered connection? It's all about patiently searching for that red thread that can tie two seemingly opposite ideas together.
Okay, so this might sound a little abstract. Let's make it super concrete. We're going to look at a few analogies that show how different systems of rules can actually coexist without contradicting each other at all. This is the key to spotting those truth gaps.
Now, take this quote from the Quran. You've probably heard it before. It might seem like just a metaphor for something being impossible, but it's actually describing a really profound and logical rule about how reality is structured, a rule about systems and scale that you'll see applies to everything.
So what's the big idea here? It's actually super simple. A camel is a larger system than the eye of a needle. It just cannot fit. It's an absolute truth, kind of like saying you can't fit the entire ocean into a teacup. This idea of different layers or different scales of reality is crucial. Let's see how it applies in a more modern context.
Okay, so let's think about a video game. Inside any game, there are clear rules, right? There's a clear sense of cause and effect. But are those the only rules that are actually at play?
Well, no. You've got two layers. First, you have the game rules. Things like collect 100 coins, get an extra life. That's a cause and effect that's relative to the game's world. But underneath all of that, there's a much more fundamental layer, the hardware system. The game can't do anything the console or the PC hardware doesn't allow it to do. The hardware sets the absolute limits. So the game's rules are relative. The hardware's rules are absolute. They don't contradict each other, they just operate on completely different levels. Still with me? We can see this exact same principle at work with something as simple as computer software. Just think about editing a photo on your computer.
You could use one app that just has a simple sharpen button. Then you might use another, more professional app that uses a complex set of sliders to do the exact same thing. These are different relative methods, but both of those applications are built on a more fundamental programming language. That code is the absolute foundation that dictates what both apps are even capable of doing in the first place. Again, two layers of rules working together in perfect harmony.
So how do we actually use this idea of layered thinking in our own lives? It all starts by recognizing that truth often isn't flat, it's multidimensional. Think of reality as having different layers, or different zoom levels. Some layers deal with the practical cause and effect rules of how things work, and this is where science is incredible. But other layers might deal with things like meaning, purpose, and foundational principles, areas that are often explored by philosophy or spirituality. They aren't necessarily fighting each other, they can just be different lenses for describing different dimensions of the very same reality.
And this brings us back to the crucial point. The problem isn't technology, it's not science, it's not progress. The real danger is the mindset that this fast-paced world can create, one that makes us jump to the rebuttal gap, because it's just quicker and easier than patiently searching for the truth gap.
So this is really our main takeaway. We can consciously choose to upgrade our own mental software. Instead of just looking for a flaw to win a point, we can start looking for a gap as an opportunity to connect, to learn, and to build a more complete, more accurate picture of the world. The goal isn't to prove someone wrong, but to find a more profound truth together.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. The next time you come across an idea that just seems to totally contradict what you know, just pause for a second. Instead of rushing to find the fault line,
Ask yourself, what if this isn't a rebuttal gap at all, but a truth gap? What undiscovered connection is just waiting for me to find it?
You know, in today's world, we're just saturated with information. It can really feel like we're caught in a crossfire between faith, science, and spirituality. But what if the real fight isn't between the ideas themselves? What if it's all about how we approach them? In this explainer, we're going to dive into a framework for finding synergy where most people only see conflict. So this brings us to a huge question that so many of us wrestle with. Are faith and reason just two separate paths, always destined to split apart? Or is there maybe a way to walk them both? A way to find a deeper, more unified understanding of our world? That's the core question we're really going to get into. I mean, think about it. We hear all these terms thrown around from theology, physics, psychology, things like quantum mechanics, emanation, flow state, and it's so easy to just feel completely overwhelmed. It can seem like this chaotic jumble of ideas that just don't fit together. But what if that confusion we're feeling is actually a symptom of something much, much deeper? Well, the source material here suggests the real issue isn't the information overload itself, it's our own lack of care. In our rush to form an opinion, we create what you might call a justification gap. We hurry to defend a position we've barely thought about. What we should be doing is patiently looking for the truth gap, that missing connection, that undiscovered common ground that could actually bring us some near clarity. And believe me, this tendency to rush to judgment is anything but new. In fact, a brilliant thinker from way back in the 11th century diagnosed this exact problem with just stunning clarity. He offered this timeless piece of advice that is honestly more relevant today than ever before. Right, so the crucial point comes from the great 11th century philosopher Al-Ghazali. He said, "To criticize something before understanding it is an accusation born of ignorance and error." Wow. Before we dismiss any idea, whether it's from science or scripture, we have a duty, a responsibility to first truly grasp what it's saying. This simple principle is going to be our foundation today. Okay, so to help us actually practice that principle of understanding first, we're going to use a really powerful framework. Let's call it the 4 dimensions of truth. Think of it like a compass that helps you navigate complex ideas without getting lost in all those seeming contradictions. And what's so powerful about this framework is that you can apply it to pretty much anything. Whether you're looking at a secret text, a scientific theory, or even a spiritual practice, you can analyze it through these 4 lenses. It really helps us see where ideas connect instead of just focusing on where they seem to clash. All right, let's break this down nice and slow. First, you have absolute truth. These are the big, unchanging, universal principles. Take, for example, a verse in the Quran that says, "They will not enter paradise until a camel passes into the eye of a needle." This is an absolute statement about impossibility. It's a universal truth. A larger capacity simply cannot fit into a smaller one. Second, we have relative truth. This stuff depends on context. Think about all the diverse forms of optional worship in a religion. They can vary a lot, but they're all considered valid within their own framework. Third is subjective truth. This is all about your personal inner experience, that feeling of peace you get during prayer, or that deep focus during meditation. It's undeniably real, but it's internal to you. And finally, there's objective truth, the practical, observable effects in the real world. Like when a community practices charity, the objective result is a measurable drop in poverty and a boost in social harmony. See? So now that we have the framework, let's actually put it to the test. Let's use it to build a bridge between 2 worlds that are so often pitted against each other, science and faith. Let's take a classic example here. The first law of thermodynamics. It states that energy can't be created or destroyed, it only changes form. Now, this scientific law is often pulled out to challenge religious stories of creation. But does it really create a conflict? Let's see. This illustrates the difference perfectly. The flawed conclusion, the one that creates conflict, treats an objective truth as if it were an absolute one. But the synergistic view, using our framework, sees it completely differently. It recognizes the first law as a powerful, objective truth that operates within a very specific relative context, a closed physical system. It describes the rules inside the universe. It doesn't, and logically it can't, say anything about the absolute truth of a creator who might exist outside of that system and who set those rules in motion in the first place. There's no conflict here, just different dimensions of truth. Now, it is so crucial to be clear about what we're trying to do here. This isn't syncretism, where you just water down different beliefs and mush them all together. And it's definitely not kokologi. That's an Indonesian term for the pseudoscience of trying to force connections that aren't actually there. No, the goal is true synergy, finding that valid, coherent meeting point where different truths can actually illuminate each other, all without compromising the integrity of either one. So you see, this isn't just some intellectual exercise. It's really about adopting a whole new mindset, a more patient, a more precise, and frankly, a more powerful way to engage with a world of ideas. And remember, this framework is not about abandoning your core beliefs. It's the exact opposite. It's a tool to help you understand them more deeply and to talk about them more effectively. It's about building bridges of understanding in an age that desperately needs them, by expanding your explanation, not by changing your foundation. So, how can you actually apply this in your own life? Here's a simple 4-step guide. First, when you encounter a challenging idea, just pause. Seriously, just resist that immediate urge to react. Second, analyze. Ask yourself, okay, which dimensions are at play here? Absolute, relative, subjective, or objective? Third, connect. Look for that valid synergy. How do these different dimensions relate without actually contradicting each other? And finally, step 4, clarify. Use this deeper understanding to enrich your own perspective and then explain it more clearly to others. The journey really starts now with you. You're armed with this framework of the 4 dimensions, a brand new tool for clarity. So the real question is, where are you going to use it first? What apparent conflict between science, faith, or philosophy will you now go back and re-examine with fresh eyes? The path to synergy is wide open.